Thank you for clicking in to explore the far-reaching impacts of the choices we make, one conversation at a time. This is The Ripple Effect. Welcome to The Ripple Effect. Today with me is Macy Baxi, an inspiring professional. She's done quite a bit in her little short time of being a podcast interviewer, we'll say. She started at 17, moving from Detroit to Palm Coast. So we want to talk to her a little bit, what got her there, why she started a podcast, and who inspires her in her family and where she wants to go in the future. So with that, I want to turn it over to Macy and get a little bit more about, if she could just tell us, when did she move, why she started a podcast, and where she plans to go with it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. So you want me to just kind of go ahead and kind of bring about, I guess, the whole journey? Start from Detroit. So I'm Detroit born and raised, which is a really, really fun thing for me to say. I'm really, really proud of it. My family, I have two sides of my family, obviously, as most people do. My dad came over from India, and my mom's family all came over from China. So they're the ones who came to Detroit. They started a Chinese restaurant in Detroit, eventually moved it to the suburbs in a city called Troy. So I've been working there. I'd worked there from ages 7 to 16. So I've been working for a good amount of time. But I really loved being a part of Troy. But obviously my dad, being from India, he never adjusted to the cold. He never adjusted to snow. It was always his dream since coming to the States to move to Florida. So in 2019, my family closed the restaurant just because of retirement reasons. It had been in our family for about 45 years. So they were like, it's time to retire. No one in the next generation, my generation, wanted to take it over. So they retired. And then in 2022 or 2021, I think 2021, my grandma had passed away. And I was living with her. My whole family was living with her full time. We were taking care of her my whole life. So we were like, those were the two real permanent things keeping us in Michigan. So my dad decided at that time to start looking. So he really wanted to live on the east coast of Florida. So we all put together as a family, we got together, we gave like, what should the city have, what coast it should be on, obviously the east coast, like what are we looking for population-wise, other areas. So my mom took our list and she just went city by city on the map, just Googling every city. So it was between Palm Coast and Melbourne. We all remember when she came to us, she was like, guys, I think we're gonna look at Palm Coast. And we're all like, what is Palm Coast? We had never heard of that in our entire life. We used to snowbird a little bit in Daytona and Kissimmee, so we're familiar with Florida, but obviously Palm Coast is a different thing. So that's really what brought us here. We moved in about 2022, so it's been 2.5 years of being here. We've really, really loved it. But kind of going back to podcasting, so like you mentioned, I started at 17, and really the reason behind it was because my dad's been an entrepreneur, a business coach my whole life. So there wasn't really anything when I turned 18 that I really, really, really needed to specifically do, like go to college or anything like that. Like there was nothing really speaking to me. So my dad's like, hey, why don't you start interviewing all of my really successful business friends? He's like, why don't you go just 15 minutes, record them for a podcast and post them online. Just ask them, what would they say to their younger self, their 17-year-old self? And through that, I did about maybe 150 of those within a year or so, maybe less than a year. And it was really, really helpful for me to learn about all the types of things to do in business. And what really helped me was, my communication skills. We were kind of talking before the recording that there are different guests. Sometimes they just talk the whole time. Sometimes they don't know how to talk. But it is a skill as an interviewer to kind of lead them in the direction you want, right? It's easy for people to go on tangents. It's easy for them to get off topic, or they just don't know what to say. They don't know what you want them to say. So to really coax it out of them. So that's a really big skill that I learned. So when I moved down to Florida, we had this podcast idea, and we were like, my dad's like, why don't you go interview local businesses? But they weren't really like responding to that topic. So I was like, let me just try to pivot that a little bit. So I started Why I Love Flagler County, because I've noticed in Flagler, it's a small community, but they really love that aspect. Like that's kind of their biggest pride. And I was like, you know what? Why don't I just kind of spotlight that instead of trying to break the wheel that's already turning. So I started going up to people and I was like, hey, I would love to interview you, 15 minutes over Zoom, make it as easy as possible. Just talking about your love of Flagler, talking about your love of your business. And it took me a little bit to kind of get it going, but I think now I've done about 185 episodes on that.
You mentioned you would go to networking events, and that's how you would get content.
Yeah, so you don't know anyone. It's really easy to go on social media, but it's kind of weird if you just go friend random people and then you message them and you're like, hey, let's talk. And everyone's like, what? Talk about what? So when I'd go to networking events, it was easier because they could see me. I'm a pretty non-threatening figure. I look young. I am young. So they're like, okay, she's probably not like a crazed psycho, which I thought was very nice of them to think. So it did take me some time. I will say that not everyone that I first approached for the podcast really was interested, because they were like, how many viewers do you have? Like, does anyone even care about your podcast? I'm like, it's a great question. I just started. But thankfully I'd made some pretty nice connections, and from there they had a network. So I'd be like, hey, wait, I just realized you know her. She was on my podcast. And they're like, oh, well, if she did your podcast, then I can do your podcast. I'm like, yeah. So thankfully I was really persistent at it, and I was able to get a few really great people and then start leveraging those episodes to continue growing that.
Were there specific traits or specific people or any type of vocations that you wanted people to be in to interview, or you just took what you can get?
Yeah, at least definitely at first. For obvious reasons, I'm a young woman, so I connected a lot with other women, and I really liked that, because I think a lot of other women in business see me and they kind of see themselves in me, and so it was easier for them, I think, to take a leap on that. So I want to say almost probably my first 30 were all women, now that I'm thinking about it.
Well, when we first started this one, I got lucky that the first couple podcasts that we did were kind of in my wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. And as we move on, they're starting to get further and further out of my wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. So you find yourself having to spend more time with the topics. Mm-hmm. And for me, or for us, it doesn't really work just to have somebody come in and just shoot the breeze. You got to do a little bit of research.
Sure.
When you have somebody come in, do you do any research on these people?
So I will say, my first podcast, What Would You Say to Your Younger Self? My dad worked with a lot of realtors and loan officers. So that's what I got really good at talking about. Because probably about 90% of those people on that podcast were loan officers or realtors. So obviously I was 17 years old. I didn't know the first thing about originating a loan. But now I know a few more steps because they all had to talk about it. But obviously we have different types of podcasts. So mine is only 15 minutes. So I don't technically really have to go that deep into it. That being said, especially because there's the in-person aspect to it, I get to learn. I usually ask them a few questions, usually as just a rapport building. It's not really me finding them out or anything. Mm-hmm. It's just like, hey, tell me about your business. How long have you been in it? What do you love about it? What got you into it? So I already know this about this person because I met them at an in-person event. And because I had formed this connection, I'd taken, every conversation probably maybe 5 minutes. It's not a super long conversation when I meet them in person. And then I go, hey, I love your story. Can we share this on my podcast? And they're like, yeah, because they just shared it with me. It's not too different when they come on Zoom and they just do it again. Mm-hmm. So I already know a few things about them. If they like certain foundations that they want to talk about, we can talk about. Or I know a little bit about their stories or a fun fact. So if I know that about the person already, I usually do that. So I at this point, I know all of the 185 people I've done, and it was funny, I was at a networking event not too long ago, and she's like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, and I'm like, I remember you. You were wearing sunglasses, you were here, you were doing this, and this is what we talked about. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe you remembered that. And I'm like, of course I remember that. It's my job. That's what I have to do. So, yeah, if that kind of answers it.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so your father's the one that actually opened the door for all this and gave you the first kind of clientele and so forth.
Yeah.
And he's also helping you a lot with this ability to converse. Mm-hmm. The whole thing that's made you successful that you want to talk about later is conversations and so mm-hmm. forth, which is definitely a vital skill mm-hmm. in being successful in life. Do you think it's also helped you in a lot of other ways, this ability to
1,000%. Yeah. Like I mentioned, I worked at my family's restaurant from ages 7 to 16. And when I was 11, I started working front of the house. So I started doing phone calls, cashier, all that kind of stuff. So I had to talk to people all the time. And you talk to all types of people in all types of moods. So you have to get really good at either diffusing a situation or just realizing like, hey, this person is probably not mad at me. They're probably just mad, and I can't take it personally. Like I can't take that home take that with me at home at the end of the night. So it was really helpful. I was able to build relationships and rapport with some of the customers when I was 13, 14, because my dad had just taken so much time to really educate me on the type of people there are, how to talk to them, how to appeal to them, how to build rapport quickly with them. And of course it carried on into all my personal friendships too. He used to quiz me on my friends and be like, what type of personality do you think she is? And he's like, okay, so why do you think that? Great, so now that you know that, what are you going to do like when you guys hang out to make sure that she feels, good? So if I have a friend who's super talkative, I'll be like, yeah, well, now I know that if she talks, I'm not supposed to interrupt. Like she goes on 15-minute tangents, I'm done. Like it's not for me to interrupt at all. Or if it's a friend who I know takes a really long time in making decisions, I'll give her, instead of being like, hey, what do you want to do? I'll go, hey, do you want to go to this restaurant or that restaurant? And that helps her so much more than me being mad that she's not making a decision. Well, I just know that's part of her personality. I can't get mad at her anymore, right? So it was super helpful growing up in all aspects from, as long as I could talk, I knew how to start reading people's personalities.
This is actually a very good managerial skill in order to understand the resources you have. Manpower is a resource that is very important in managerial. And also just to converse, be able to give your vision, give your direction and so forth. So your father's really prepared you really well for life.
Yeah.
I would think a lot of kids in your age would probably, at that age range, would be upset having to work all the time. I see this in, especially, we'll say foreigners or people from another country coming to America. Sometimes they have these kind of businesses where they kind of do this.
Sure.
So did you ever feel like it was too much for you to have to do all that?
Probably when I was very young. I was a rebellious child, and thankfully it ended pretty quickly. Like I would say around like 7 or 8, I was pretty much done with that. And I think I just learned that the more that I was learning all of these skills, it was helping me anyway, but also it kind of like in a sense got him off my back that I was able to apply these things and I was doing these, and I started just knowing all the answers. I knew the answers to questions before he ever asked me. Like a very common thing he used to ask me when I was a kid is if I'd go to a party, he'd ask me like how many people were there. And he would ask me like just different questions, and it was really for my skill of paying attention, because it's really easy to go through life and never pay attention to things that don't personally affect you. So I would start just getting in the car from a party and be like, just someone's birthday party, and be like, all right, Dad, so there were at least 20 kids. I want to say maybe 7 of them were boys, and a lot of them were from this girl's second grade class, and I talked to some of the kids, and here's what they said, and stuff like that. And he's like, oh my God, okay. So now it's super helpful, because when I go to networking events, I can immediately read the room, and I immediately know how many people are in a room. I can do the math really quickly. And then because of that, I go, okay, I can tell this group is like, there's like a group inside the group. I can go and I can talk to them, and I can really see, maybe who is the leader of a group or something like that. So it's really helpful when I network, when I go to events, and I can look and I go, okay, so this person looks like I can go up and talk to them. They have a few seconds. Or I noticed this person was talking to this person, and I know that other person. So if I go to there and I say, hey, I also know this person, it's easier for me to build a rapport and relationship. And I don't even think he was thinking about that when he was asking me those questions. I think he's just a curious person as well. But that's a skill that was really helpful, and it's been really helpful now.
If you started this podcast when you were 17, it sounds like, doing the math, you were still in high school.
Yes, I was homeschooled my whole life.
Okay, so I was going to wonder, how did you manage that schedule with podcasting? Yeah. And also, how many podcasts do you do a week?
Oh, I don't really have an average number anymore.
More than one?
Yeah. When I was really in the thick of it, like I did most of my recordings, like a lot of episodes, I had a really consistent goal. I wanted to do at least 100 episodes, I think, by March. And so from January, February, and then going into March, I think I was doing 4 a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a goal I usually have, is having like 3 to 4 a day, because that's a really good ratio for me to keep up with people and, you know, talking to people and meeting people.
Okay. That's really interesting. So to keep that kind of schedule, you have to do a lot of reaching out to people and making sure that the schedules meet. So your schedule is pretty flexible, I would guess, to be able to make that. But you still have to make the contact and you know, develop those relationships. Like you said, you like to make everything in person. So where are you going to meet all these people exactly?
There's a lot of things in town. I didn't know that until I had to start looking. So one thing is I'm a part of the BNI here in Palm Coast, and they have about 80 members. So when I joined the BNI in Palm Coast in like late December, early January, there was only 70 or 60 members at the time. And I immediately tried to knock out as many as I can. So I think I've done like 40 or 50 from that group. And some of them I couldn't do, like some financial advisors and stuff. They couldn't come on a podcast and they didn't want to talk. I'm like, that's totally fine. I'm not going to force you.
So for our listeners,
I'm sorry, did you say
viewers,
BNI?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Business Networking International. So it's a networking group. It's an international, I'm pretty sure, networking group. And they meet weekly, and it's a way to track referrals. So it's a referral tracking group. So every week we meet, we all present to each other. It's like 30, 40 seconds of being like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Here's a great referral from me. I would love to meet this person of this person. So it's a great way to connect with people in your chapter on a very consistent basis, and just continuing to see them and knowing that they're there.
Okay. So in addition to meet your, you know, the letter that you would send to yourself when you're 17, your other one's the Why I Love Flagler. What other content have you covered? What other subjects have you covered? Which one did you like the most?
I had a very short-lived one. It was a 30-minute podcast where it was like, what would you do if you had to restart your entire business in 30 days? I don't know how many I did. Not that many, like maybe 15 or something. And that was a longer podcast. So I've pretty much done those 3 topics. I'm trying to think if I've done any other. Not really. I really liked the Flagler one. I think it's because I fell into a very easy pattern with it, because I already had the skills. So the first podcast, What Would You Say to Your Younger Self? Like 70% of those episodes, it's just me trying to figure out what works the best, how to be the best interviewer. But I did Why I Love Flagler County, I pretty much knew everything I needed to do. It was just finding a rhythm and staying into it. Like, this is kind of a secret, I guess, but it's not a secret if you watched more than 2 of my episodes, but all of my intros are the same because I just fell into it. So I can repeat on the spot. So, hi guys, thank you so much for coming back. Welcome back to an episode of Why I Love Flagler County, your local podcast about letting local businesses and local residents on what they love about being a part of Flagler County. So it's I've just fallen into a pattern, and it's been really easy. And it's not to say that every episode is the same. It's just that everything is just so subconscious. I don't have to be on the edge of my seat being like, what am I supposed to ask next? What am I supposed to talk about next? It's super easy for me to just have a conversation with people now.
What, if you could... Is there any podcast that you've done that stands out over the rest?
Like an interviewer?
An interview, it could be a person, it could be a subject matter, it could be how the conversation went. Just anyone that just pops out in your head. You don't have to name a name.
Okay, let me think. I've done some pretty cool ones. I think some of my favorite ones is when, you know, I do know a little bit about them, but then they randomly pop up with like a cool fact. This is kind of funny. It's not like a specific one, but at the end of my podcast, sometimes if we have time, I ask a question, you know, what would you recommend people do in town? You know, any events, places to go, people to see, like anything like that. And I think back in January, a gentleman had mentioned, he was like, there's a dog surfing competition in Palm Coast. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, there's a dog surfing competition in the summer in Flagler. And I was like, oh my God. This is incredible. I'm not even a dog person like that, but it sounded really cool. So I'm like, I'm marking my calendar. He's like, yeah, I don't think it's until like July or something. And I'm like, doesn't matter. I'm waiting and I'm doing it. And then I would bring it up at different times to random people as well. And I'd be on the podcast. I'm like, hey, have you guys heard of a dog surfing competition? And they're like, oh yeah, I have. I've been to it. And I'm like, can you tell me more? And so I think like like 10 episodes spanning from 10 different ones spanning from January to March. I'm asking random people about a dog surfing competition. And then I think it was in end of June, I saw the event on Facebook. I'm like, holy crap, I'm in town, putting it on my calendar and everything. And then I was hanging out with one of my friends earlier that week, and she's like, hey, what's your plans this weekend? I'm like, and we were talking. She's like, oh, my boyfriend's going to go see Lord of the Rings in theaters if you want to go, like, hang out with, our friends. And I was like, that sounds great. I'm going to go to a dog surfing competition, actually. And she's like, you're going to a what? I'm like, I'm going to a dog surfing competition. And she's like, well, send me the time. I'm going to go too. So that was probably like my highlight of having my podcast, is learning cool, fun stuff about Flagler that way. Too.
Lord of the Rings is like 25 years old. Why would you go see that?
No, my friends are really big Lord of the Rings fan. Don't let them hear you say that.
And then also one of your series, he actually mentioned it was a letter to my younger 17-year-old self. And it made me think, if you could go back in time and give advice to your first 10 podcasts, what would you tell yourself?
I think I would just tell myself, like, everything is going to be okay. I have a lot of anxiety. I was diagnosed with anxiety when I was like 7 or 8. Like, I was really young. So I have generalized anxiety disorder. So I get anxious over anything. And so I remember my first podcast. Like, I don't remember anything I said, but I remember how it felt, and I remember who it was. And I just remember waking up that day. I think it was like at 1 p.m. was the podcast. And I spent like the entire morning just praying that it would cancel. And I was like, please, like, send me an email, send me a phone call, send me a text that you can't do it, that something's coming, like, please. But then it was like 12:30. I'm like, crap, it's gonna go. Like, I have to do it. And I was like, maybe there's some way I can cancel it. But then if I canceled it and my dad found out, he would kill me. So I was like, crap, I have to do this. And then I did it. And he was a really nice guy. He was, I've met him a few times in person. He's a really close friend of my family. And so I just knew he was a nice guy. It might have been terrible. I genuinely don't remember. I blacked out. I have no idea what was said. But he was really nice, and he was really nice about it as well. So, I mean, even months or years later now, he's like, yeah, it was so much fun doing that with you, Macy. I had so much fun. I was like, really? Are you sure?
Is you said most of your, I saw a couple of your podcasts, and they were between 10 and 15 minutes. Is that by design, and why?
My dad gave me the time back when I first did my podcast. He was just like, yeah, just do 10, 15 minutes. Don't. Because a really big part of this is a lot of the people that he's friends with, and a lot of those clients that I first did the podcast for, they don't really have time to do an hour-long podcast. Like, if they did, it would have to be a whole ordeal of, like, scheduling that and, like, what that would look like. And he's like, don't stress out. He's like, I just want you to do, go through the repetition of it and go through the process of it. He's like, I don't need it to be perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect, especially right out the gate. I mean, obviously be professional, be nice, all those things. But it doesn't have to be picture perfect. So it was by design to do 10, 15 minutes just to get as many done as possible within a short amount of time. And then especially when I came to Palm Coast, I just kept that because it was easy for, other people's attention spans as viewers, but also these other people, I want to say probably 99% of the people who have come on my podcast have never done a podcast before. So when I say it's 15 minutes, like, oh, God, I don't have to do an entire hour-long prepared talk. It's just 15 minutes. I'm just talking about my business. That's totally doable. I can do that. So it was just easy to keep it that way.
And so you were doing podcasts in Detroit, Troy, which is actually, I spent some time in Detroit.
Nice.
In, I forget the name of the area. I spent some time in Hamtramck for a little bit, and then another area, Royal Oaks.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways.
Royal Oaks, very nice.
Yes, a lot nicer than Hamtramck.
Yes.
Did you find it different, the people that you were interviewing, as opposed to their willingness to talk and be open in Michigan than here in Florida?
I didn't really interview a lot of people in Michigan. All the people that my dad was friends with and all the people that I was using for that podcast were national. So they could just be for anywhere.
So Why I Love Metro Detroit could have been anybody. It wasn't just people from that area.
So Why I Love Metro Detroit is a newer one. That's because I still had a lot of contacts in Michigan, and so I was like, oh, I can interview them on being a part of Michigan. But I never really did as what I did for Why I Love Flagler County. I never did that when I lived in Michigan, especially.
Do you feel your podcast has evolved?
Like, evolved in what sense?
Well, involved in the sense that you have become more a better interviewer.
Oh, yeah.
That the questions you ask are more detailed and are less closed-ended, more open-ended to allow the interviewer to say what they want to say.
Yeah, I would love to think that I've improved, and I do think that I've improved, especially since my first few. And I think a big part of that is making people feel comfortable, and that was a big... I don't know if it was as conscious of a skill as it was just something that I picked up after doing so many episodes. But a lot of the first 100 episodes I did, these were professional people. They didn't really care that they were being recorded. They didn't care that it was like they're just living their kind of authentic lives and stuff. And I'm not saying anyone isn't, but they genuinely, like, they've been through this. They've usually done like probably a podcast before. Or they've had some type of, they film content and they post it. But coming to Florida, a lot of these people, like I said, have never done a podcast before, so it's of utmost importance that they feel 1,000% comfortable with me, that they don't even realize they're being recorded. It's not even a thought in their brain. And especially in Flagler, when I get off a podcast, I'm like, hey, so how did that feel? Like, how did you feel about the whole thing? Because that's a really important question to ask. And they always go, oh my God, this was amazing. Like, this was so much fun. You made it so comfortable. Thank you so much. A lot of people have said, they were like, especially as I started around like 30 or 40, a lot of the guests were like, yeah, I heard from all of my friends that you were so nice to them and you made them feel so comfortable. And you definitely did. Like, everyone was just saying to do it because you're the best interviewer. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm so happy to do that for you.
It was interesting. When I was asked to do this by Neil, I said, I agreed to it. I'll do it. But don't ask me to critique myself. I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to watch it. I mean, I'll watch it, but I just don't want to, because I'll become self-conscious of the things I do, and maybe when that happens, I'll sit there and I'll be like a stone. So don't ask me to do that. But then I realized that you don't have three people. You're one person, so you kind of have to review your content and critique it yourself. Do you find yourself? I'm wondering if that's limiting to you, or you try not to do that.
I don't really watch myself back at all. I've never really watched any of my episodes back, I don't think.
Then how do you know what to cut and what not to cut? Or you don't cut anything, you just let it run?
Yeah, because it's only 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Usually nothing's really being said that's too crazy in 15 minutes, like no one's really telling me. I have had people tell me their life story, but no one's really telling me anything that's insane within 15 minutes because there's just no time to do it, so it's never been a worry. I've had to cut a few, but that's just because like they were like, wait, I didn't want to answer the question this way, can we just redo the question? I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Or if there was like I've had a few internet connection problems, and that was about it. But I do self-correct a lot, and like I said, I have anxiety, so I think about everything I say all the time. And so especially when I was like 18 or 19, I was like, this is really no way for me to be living, is for me to go to bed every night and I can't sleep because all I can do is think about every single thing, every single word I've said, especially it's recorded, it's posted. Like if I get in my head about that, I can't do this anymore. So I genuinely, I don't know how I do it, but I just kind of like in my head, I just imagine like closing a door and just not thinking about them. But I do self-correct. So if I'm very good in the moment, I can self-correct. And so I go, oh, you know what? I probably don't want to ask a question like that again. Or, I liked this question. I'm going to write this down so I can do it again. So I'm pretty good about that. And then I think a lot of times, I used to be a figure skater. So I think my body is used to finding out what's comfortable and just staying with it, if that makes sense. Because like when you're doing something in the air, like when you jump on a blade in the air and then you have to land, if your body doesn't feel comfortable, you're not landing. You're not doing anything. You're falling on your face and you're like breaking a bone.
Have you ever done a podcast where you just didn't air? Because it just didn't make the cut?
I have done a podcast. This was a very long time ago. I think I have done a few podcasts where I didn't air it because it was just an uncooperative guest. And I was like, this makes no sense for me to post it. You are not, like, it's not going to service either of us to post this.
I thought you were going to say because I had a bad hair day. I don't think I'm going to put that out there.
No, I've had those as well. So we understand. We've had our share of guests that are kind of like, yeah, okay, not gonna happen.
Like I've had guests straight up like, and I've aired some of them. I've had guests straight up just like completely contradict me for no reason. Like they just want to do that, and I'm like, okay, do you know the first thing about talking to a human being? Like, why are you doing this to me? Like, why are you trying to humiliate me when I'm recording and I'm posting this and I want to, put
That's
you
where
in a good
editing
light?
comes in.
Yeah, but then it's just like, now I'm just soured about it. I'm like, man, come on.
So, also, I wanted to, I know we get to it, but I just want to jump on it. That TEDx interested me. Can you give me a soundbite on that?
Soundbite on like what specifically?
Well, like what was your topic? You said that it's not out yet, so I was wondering what the topic was.
Yeah. So it's all about intentional conversations. So I did so many podcasts. I did 103 or 4 months when I was 17. And through that, I was, self-correcting a lot. I was like, okay, well, they reacted well to this, they didn't react well to that. I'm very hyper aware of how people react to me and how people converse with me. So I would take notes, and I really transformed, and we were talking about like, now I've definitely improved and I've worked on so many of these skills. So it was about 6 minutes. It's pretty short, but it's very, very just like, this point, this is what you can learn, this is how you do it. And a really big part of that is for especially people my age, I want to say college age, high school age, we have a lot of anxiety when talking to people in person. I know a lot of my friends who are like, they'll ask me, they're like, hey, can you go ask the server for this? And I'm like, yeah, I can do that for you, but I shouldn't have to, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not mad if they ask me to. It genuinely doesn't bother me. But I have friends who, like, they don't want to make phone calls. They don't want to, like, talk and ask questions. Like, I remember one time I was in, like, a drive-thru, and I was like, hey, can you ask her for an extra fork? And my friend's like, actually, I think I have, like, an extra fork in the car. Let's not worry about it. I'm like, girl, we need a fork. Like, there's no other way around it. So I had a lot of social anxiety, too, as well, just generalized, right? And so I was like, you know what? I really, really, really want to show kids and other people my age that we can have conversations, but we can both feel great about it. And that's really a big part that I learned, and it helped me so much in other aspects of my life. Like, my confidence in general has really skyrocketed because of that ability to be really well with conversations, or I'd like to think, and just building great friendships and connections and not having to worry about like, oh, does this person actually really like me? It's like, well, I know I've been putting in the effort, and it's up to them if they want to reciprocate that effort. So knowing that stuff.
And it was called Intentional. What was the title of it?
Intentional Conversations. Mm-hmm. So the actual talk, the official talk that I, like the title that I gave it, and they were telling me that it's up to TED now. I think they've sent it to TED, and TED can do whatever they want with it, apparently. But the title that I wrote for it was Feeling Invisible, It's Not You. It's not them, it's you. Because a big part of me having conversations and going to networking events and being in person is that I felt like I was a child. I felt like I didn't belong there. And because of that, other people could see that in me. Other people could be like, oh, well, she's just a child, or she doesn't have any authority. She doesn't have anything. But I would like to say this is probably one of my biggest accomplishments is now when I go to networking events, no one asked me when I graduated high school. And people offer me wine, and I'm like, you know what? Thank you so much. Do you think I'm old enough for this? I mean, I am now.
You are now.
I am now, but I turned 21 like a month ago, so it's still pretty new. But yeah, so when I was like 20, for a majority of me being in Palm Coast, everyone's like, yeah, do you want a glass? And I'm like, thank you so much. I can't. I don't really drink that much either, so it doesn't really bother me. But so that was my biggest accomplishment, because I stopped thinking of myself as that like child of like a high schooler, and it really reflected in the way that people saw me and the way I showed up in my life.
Now, did they invite you to this TEDx? How did they get in contact?
So TEDx, so there are different ways to do TEDx, but the most common way is you send an application to an event. So an event posts online. I actually don't know where they post it. I was working with a coach, and she helped me with a lot of that. And one of the ways that she helped it is she just sent me all of the links to apply, and I just applied myself. Mm-hmm. But I know you can just Google like TEDx applications, and you can just go find events, and it's all public. It's all like Google Forms. It's not super hard. So I applied to probably about 7 stages, and I applied to like 4 or 5 one morning, just all in a row, because I have all my answers in a Google Doc, so I just copied and pasted where it made sense and changed it where I needed to. And I didn't even really remember applying to Cherry Creek HS, but I got an email like one Wednesday morning, and I had gotten like 2 or 3 rejection emails at this point already, so I kind of knew what it looked like, and they were like, update on TRE HS, and I was like, oh, okay, whatever, let me just like read it. It's like 6 in the morning, I have to go to Orlando for an event, so I'm like, yeah, I'll just like read it really quick. And then I was like reading it, and they were like, we're so honored. And I'm like, that's such a weird way to start a rejection email. Like, you're so honored to what? And they're like, we're so honored. Reject you? Yeah, I know. I was so confused. I was like, they're like, yeah, we're just so honored for your application. And I'm like, to reject me? Like, this is just a weird email. And they're like, yeah, we're just so honored to have you. And I was like, have me be rejected? And then finally, by like the 7th time I was reading it, they were like, we're so excited. Like, we'd love to have you talk at our event in August in Denver. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, sign this, they attached the speaker packet. They're like, yeah, just read it over, make sure everything's good. Like, they had some trainings and stuff. They wanted to just be like, just an overview of what to expect about this event and what my obligations were, what their obligations to me were. And I was like, is this real? And I didn't know what to do about it. So I forwarded the email to my dad and my TEDx coach. And I'm like, I didn't even like add a message. I was just like, read this. Am I crazy? What is this? So yeah, that's kind of what my thoughts were. And then I went out to go see my dad because he was awake already, and he was like, congrats. And I'm like, yeah, it's real, right? Like, I'm not crazy. He's like, no, yeah, you got accepted. I was like, okay, I got accepted. And this was probably maybe May I got accepted.
I have to think that if TED Talks sponsors this, there's probably a format or criteria that you have to keep to, like maybe you have to keep a certain amount of time or a certain type of format. Was there anything like that, or you just kind of did what you want?
So TEDx Cherry Creek HS was working with a speaker coach, and she's not affiliated with TED or TEDx, but she's done TEDx events, and TEDx has all of their guidelines and rules. Like, so they do have a lot of rules, and so she's well versed in that. And so she was always editing our talks in general is to like edit it, but then she was like, yeah, I've edited it and I've made sure it fits all the guidelines. I don't think there's a timing criteria for TEDx. Actually, I don't really know the TEDx guidelines like that, but our specific event, they wanted us to be within 5 to 8 minutes.
It's short. It's hard to put information in that amount of time. You got to be really concise.
It had to be really concise, but I had been working on this talk for a while, just kind of unintentionally. So back in September of 2020, what are we in, 24, 23, I joined Toastmasters because I hadn't been speaking. I used to compete as a child with public speaking when I was in middle school and high school. So I hadn't done that in a very long time. I hadn't really like prepared a speech and competed and done all that.
Didn't you say you were homeschooled?
I was homeschooled, so it was an extracurricular activity.
Okay. And certainly it sounds like the TEDx was not the first time public speaking.
No.
Okay.
No, I've been public speaking since I could talk.
Makes it easier.
My dad has been hosting events since I was, a child. So he used to give me the stage at his events. I remember the first time I ever spoke. Though spoke is very generous because I got up there and I just stared at everyone in the crowd. There wasn't that many people, like 25 people. And they just stared at me back. And I stared at them and I was like, okay, I'm done. And my dad's like, yeah, okay. Like, they asked me some questions. They're very kind. Obviously, I'm a 7-year-old child. They're not going to be like throw tomatoes at me. But my dad's like, just go talk. My very big interest at the time was American Girl dolls. And so I had an American Girl doll in one hand and my American Girl doll suitcase in the other. And they were like, oh, well, have you been to the Chicago? Because the Chicago store is the biggest store. Mm-hmm. And they're like, have you been to Chicago? And I was like, yeah. And that was about it. It was like 3 or 4 minutes of them just like being nice and just trying to get me to talk. And I talked a very little. But yeah, so I joined Toastmasters. And the first speech you ever give at Toastmasters is your icebreaker. And your icebreaker is not more than like 7 or 8 minutes. And it's 5 to 7 minutes, I think, or 4 to 6. It's somewhere in that range. It's a short one, and it's just you kind of sharing a little bit about you, right? You're new to the group. They don't know you that well. You've never given them like a formal speech before. So that was my icebreaker. So my icebreaker was along that line of intentional conversations. And then I found out that there was a competition in December that I could compete for the club level. So there's like different levels, which is like club, district, division. I could be mixing them up, but there's a few levels that you can go and you can compete and you can represent your club. And I was like, oh my God, I love competing. I haven't competed in ages, right? So I was like, I want to do it. And they were like, okay. And they're like, yeah, you can do it. You gave your icebreaker and stuff. You're fine. But then they read the rules and they're like, oh, actually, you have to have given like 7 speeches before you can compete. And I was like, well, I have a month. Let me do it. So I went to different clubs in Florida, a lot of them Zoom, some in person. And then I just kept giving them this improved version of my icebreaker, and a lot of it was on conversations, on how to talk to someone, how I went from feeling like invisible to how I show up in the world now and how I can connect with people. So I just kept on rewriting this speech over and over again without really realizing, and then that ended up being the speech. It's pretty much completely rewritten from when I first did it, but I had already been drafting this speech for so long that I didn't have to go through that many edits when I did the TEDx talk, because I had already been editing it so well. So I'd already like had my big idea and really like condensed it already, because I had to compete within 7 minutes anyway. So I was so used to that time. It was a breeze to me.
Oh, that's cool. So you keep on saying that you have a lot of anxiety, but I don't really see this. And all the conversations that you've had and had to do has probably alleviated a lot of this problem over time.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
I mean, yeah, I would say so. There's still, I think it just depends. I think I get more anxious around people my age now than people who are older than me. I feel more comfortable with people who are older than me in that aspect, because I don't know if I just feel less judged or something, or I don't know, but it's more like generalized, and it's definitely something I've worked on a lot since I was a kid, definitely since middle school, high school.
Well, you've I would say with your people your age, they don't converse as well, probably. So you got to probably carry the conversation a little bit more. It's a little bit more pressure on you.
Yeah.
You think that's because of phones, maybe?
That's the number one question I get when I tell people about my TEDx talk, and when I tell them it's on. They're like, is it the phones? Is it the phone that's ruining a generation? Probably. I don't know. I don't have any like real science behind it. But I think even on the phone, it's hard to really talk. I just think that... So when I was a child, probably 7 or 8, my dad gave me the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I wrote it. I had to transcribe it, or I just had to like copy it. So he gave me pieces of paper and he gave me a pen and he goes, write it out, chapter. And so that was like the number one thing I learned as a kid, because the first chapter is all about really connecting with people, that initial rapport. And the first lesson you really learn in that book, and I could be wrong, but this is what stood out to me the most. I haven't reread it since I was a kid, though I should, given everything I'm doing. But it was just letting the other person talk, right? Be interested, not interesting. Not that that's a direct quote from the book, I don't think. But so I've always known that. And I think the fact that all of my peers don't really know that, it's really easy for me to have a conversation and I let them talk because I don't have any ego in the conversation. I don't need to talk, though I love to talk. They don't even realize they've been talking for 30 minutes until it's been 30 minutes. They're like, wait, have I been talking this whole time? I'm like, yeah, it's not a big deal. Like, I don't mind. So I think there's just a general unawareness, because all of my friends have gone to public school at some form in their life. And so you just kind of make friends with people in your classroom. It's super easy. But then once you go in, like out of college especially, and you're kind of in your own world, like you're not in a concentrated environment with people your age that you are forced to see and talk to every day, that's when the conversation skills, I think, really come to play, where they're like, wait, it's not that easy to make friends with random people. Like, what do I do about this?
I'm sorry. Do you think there's a skills gap between traditional education and what you did, home skill?
Yeah.
But would you say most homeschooled or homeschooled students, they don't really have that conversation thing? The difference is your father put you into different ways of building that conversation to make up for it.
I know a lot of homeschooled kids who were very like stereotypical sheltered kids versus like what I did. I was in a lot of extracurricular programs as a kid. That definitely helped. Like I was a figure skater. I was a figure skater from, 4 to 16 competitively. So I skated for a very long time. So I always had people to hang out with and I skated with in my level. And then there was another thing. There was a lot of homeschool activities I did as a kid. So we did a lot of field trips. We did a lot of co-ops. So once a week I would see a group of friends that, we all did classes together. And because my dad was constantly pushing me to learn more and more about my conversation skills, every time that I would show up to these things, it wasn't just letting them happen to me, which I think is a really big thing that we don't realize, is just being conscious and present where you are. It's not an easy skill to learn. It's really easy to just let events pass by. Like, you stand in the corner, some people sometimes come up and talk to you, or you just do something and you don't have any thought to how it's impacting you in your life. But I would like to say I'm very present. And
reflective.
Yes, I'm also, I call it nosiness. I'm very nosy wherever I show up. So, like, I'll tell my dad things. I'm like, hey, did you notice that at this event like we went to? He goes, no, how did you notice that? I'm like, oh, I don't know. I was just
detail oriented.
Yeah.
You're detail oriented because your father taught you that. When you said before, your father wanted you to know how many people are in the room, what's going on.
Yeah.
It's a detail orientation. So
yeah.
that's a good skill to have as well.
And is there is there a book coming out?
Yeah, so me and my dad have been writing a book together. So my dad's written 12 books, I think. I don't remember, but over 10. So he's been writing books my whole life. So we put together a lot of the material from the different podcasts I've done. So it's kind of like some of it's from me, some of it's from him on, why was he teaching me these things when I was a kid, right? Like, why did he think it was important? But then it's like me, it's like, hey, this is how it was important. This is the real life application that I did. So we've been working on that.
Is it coming out soon?
Yeah, I think I'll have to review where we're at. But we have a few final drafts in the.
Does it have a title?
Yeah, I think the last title we ever landed on was the 7 critical career skills they don't teach in school.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you didn't go to school, though.
I did not go to school.
But you learned those skills.
I did.
And that's because your father taught you those skills, right?
Yeah.
All right. That's pretty amazing that you sat down with your father and made a book on that. And I think that based on just the conversation we had here, that if someone has watched that, they see how that has influenced your life and what it's done for you. What are you looking to do with your future? What's your future goals?
Yeah, well, I do love public speaking, so I would love to do more with that and more events. I really love that because I've grown up around events my whole life, and there are so many things about that aspect that I really love. So I think that's really what that future is. I think my biggest problem when I was 17 is I thought that I had everything in plans. Like, I knew everything I wanted to do, but then it didn't happen like that because there were a bunch of, different bumps in the road. And so I was like, I can't keep getting, have a plan in place for what you want your life to be, but leave it open enough with room for you to wiggle around in. So I would like to say my immediate future is more speaking, more talking to people, and really growing that podcast.
So do you think that you might want to be in public relations with a corporation, or you want to do your own thing?
Own thing, like those outside motivational speakers you hire for an event or something like that, along that aspect.
So you want to be a motivational speaker?
I don't know if motivational is the right word, but yeah.
Inspirational.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really know. I know there's different types of speakers for different things, but I like going and I like speaking to groups of people. So
would you speak to people your own age or just everyone
as
in
the
general?
immediate future, yes, with the TEDx topic. Obviously a different version of it, because otherwise you can just go watch the TEDx talk. But I actually did have, it wasn't a huge turnout for the event, mostly friends and families of the speakers, because there were 9 other speakers with me. But there was a local high school that came out. There was maybe 9 students that came out, and they're all sophomores in high school, so 14, 15, 16, anywhere in that age range. And I want to say about 3 teenage boys came up to me, and they were like, we loved your talk. We loved everything that you said. We're going to start applying all of the things that you said. We have a set plan in place, and we're all going to do it together. And I'm like, oh my God, that's incredible. I would have never, I guess, thought that in my wildest dreams, because I feel like we all kind of have this to one extent as oh, it's not cool anymore because I did it. So it's at this point for me, TEDx is almost it's not cool anymore because I did it, but I'm no, it is cool. It's okay. Stay on track. You're good. It was good. And the talk, it's well, I went through all of these conversations. I learned all these skills. So it's not everyone already knows this, right? We all know this. And everyone's no, we don't. We love hearing it from you. I'm oh my God, thank you so much. So definitely with this topic, talking to middle school, high school, college is probably what that immediate future looks like.
Well, with the current generation having a lot of problem with anxiety, ordering anxiety, all kinds of anxiety. I think that you think that there's a possibility you might actually have another talk, maybe even with TED Talk, doing a thing on young people's anxiety and how to deal with it, possibly through conversations.
Maybe. Sure,
it's
definitely.
Possible future, right?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a topic that's needed, and I think wanted as well.
If you had to give any advice to someone who wanted to start a podcast, what would it be?
Just start. It's very, very cliche, but I've worked with a lot of people who they really want to start a podcast, and I'm like, what's holding you back? And they're like, well, I just don't know this aspect, this aspect, this aspect. I'm like, okay, we can figure those things out, though. There are so many ways that you can figure out, like, the technical side of it. Like, you can Google, I'll help you Google it, right? I'll help you with all these things. But then once all of these, when I'm like, okay, so you have a microphone, right? Like, I get you a microphone, you know how to do this, you know how to record, you know how to post. What else is stopping you? And they're just like, I just don't know where to start. And I'm like, just go out and have a conversation with someone. Because the first one I didn't really have a clue what I was doing. But because I just did it, and me personally, I learn the best when I'm failing, which I always have to remind myself when I don't want to do something because I'm scared of failure. It's like, that is the best way I've ever learned in my entire life. I always have to remind myself, and it's such a hard lesson to learn forever and ever. But I'm like, just start. Just go. Just do like a close personal friend you have that you know everything about, that you feel comfortable with, and just be like, hey, let's have a conversation on Zoom, 15 minutes, and I can just learn how to do this. And that's the first thing I say. And then you'll find what you like. You'll find if you want it longer. You'll find if you want it shorter. You'll find what questions to ask, what questions not to ask. You'll figure that out. Like, you'll start feeling it as long as you're paying attention.
Yeah, I think people are a little worried about failure, as you said. I know that when we first started this podcast, it took us about a year to get to the quality that we wanted and get the content that we wanted too. Because, like you've probably seen, you invite people.
We're still struggling content.
Not really.
Oh,
but you see that some people you don't know what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. You talk to them beforehand, everything seems fine. Then they come on, and then you're just kind of like, wow, wasn't expecting that.
Yes.
You know that I'm talking about. Yeah, so podcast is an interesting thing. And like you said, too, I think you pointed out, sometimes they will get something from them that you weren't expecting that actually is a very unique and inspiring. Not really inspiring, let's just say more of like educational.
Sure.
There's a lot of educational things that I've learned that I didn't even have any knowledge of.
Yeah.
And just the research also brings you a lot more knowledge as well.
Yeah.
So podcast is an interesting thing. Do you think you're going to continue doing it for?
Yeah. I really like doing it. I like talking to people. And I like the relationships I've been able to build through that, so I don't really see any reason to stop that. You
also said that your new one is on Detroit.
It's not really a new one, but I had different aspects of it because I really liked the small community aspect of the Flagler podcast, so I do have one on like St. Augustine and Jacksonville. It's all the same podcast pretty much. It's just they talk about a different place that they live, and that's also what Detroit is.
Okay. So you've lived in Detroit. You've lived in Palm Coast. What are the differences?
There's a lot of differences. Weather, number one. It snows in Michigan all the time. But
not a fan?
No. I mean, thankfully, I was there most of my adolescence when I didn't drive. So I personally didn't really have to drive in the snow a lot, which I did drive a little bit before I left, but I didn't drive a whole lot. There are pros and cons to it. Where I lived in Troy, if anyone doesn't know, so Oakland County, which is where Troy is, has about 1.2 million people. And then there's Wayne County, which is Detroit, which is our neighboring county that has like under 1 million. And then there's, I forgot the other county, but the third neighboring county, like where I think Royal Oak is a part of, is like another like 1 million people. So we're used to a very populated area. So when we moved to Palm Coast, you know, I think Flagler has 80,000 people, I think, in the county. It's something smaller than 100,000 or something like that.
It's over 100,000
Oh, it's over 100,000 now? Yeah, but that's like compared. It's small for us, and none of us saw that coming. Like, we had been to Florida so many times. We used to go to Kissimmee, snowbird in Kissimmee, so I've been to Disney World like 200 times because of that. And being a part of Florida, I was like, yeah, it's just being like anywhere else. But we genuinely did not see the whole small town aspect of it until we came here, and we're like, oh, like there is a difference. Like everyone was right, there is a difference. So that's been a huge adjustment of like, it's very common. This almost never happened to me, and my dad knew a lot of people in Metro Detroit, and I knew a lot of people where I lived in Troy, but I pretty much rarely saw people I knew out at like the mall or something, because there's just so many people. You don't really recognize faces that well. But you know, most of the time, like, you go to Target, you'll know someone. You go to Publix, you might know someone. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. I genuinely didn't realize this was a real thing, I guess. I never thought too much about it. So I'd say the community feel is very different. And a lot of the things, like, my dad's from India, my mom's family's from China. So we're very used to, in Troy, like, most of our population is Indian and Chinese. So it's all we've known, like, there's at least like 10 Indian restaurants on my main road where I lived, and obviously my family owned a Chinese restaurant and everything. So coming to Palm Coast, that was our biggest cultural shift. Is there's only one Indian restaurant here, and if we really want to go Indian grocery shopping, we go to like Lake Mary or Jacksonville or Orlando, and that's a big shift for us because it was right next to my house where I lived in Troy. So those are some of the big key differences I would.
You're talking about the Indian restaurant at European Village?
Yes.
Okay. I'm new here, too, so I'm taking a stab at it.
Yeah.
And I come from Detroit as well.
Nice. I love Detroit, yeah. I liked being a part of that.
So what else do you like about the Flagler County area?
I love the beach. Very cliche answer, but my dad and I usually like to go to the beach every night for just like a sunset kind of walk if we can. So I like that. I really like the community that I have built in Palm Coast and in Flagler and the surrounding areas. Like, a lot of my friends go to school in like Daytona or Port Orange, so that's where they usually are. But I really like the community we've built, and my dad hosts like monthly lunch and learns here in Palm Coast, and because of that, we've been able to really connect with a lot of great people in this community. And there's a lot of things I think we are doing that we would have never really done in Michigan because we didn't really need to, and I think we like that aspect of what we do down here.
Well, the public speaking skills, did you ever think about running for public office?
No.
Why is that?
No, my dad was very involved with politics when I was a kid in where we lived in Troy, and then he stopped.
There's a couple seats open for
yeah,
city council.
I saw some stuff. Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm good.
They pay.
No.
Only $10,000 a year.
No, I think I like to be in control of everything that I do, and I think when you do something like that, you're not as much in control. Like, anything can really happen. So no, I'm not a big fan of going for that. Seems like a lot of pressure. I can't handle that many people perceiving me at once with that. I don't think I could do that.
You could just podcast it, and you don't have to go anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good.
So, other than the podcast, what do you think you're going to be doing with your future? What we can see you could do?
I don't know. I have the book coming out soon, and then some other stuff that we're going to write. But yeah, I think I'm in that next planning step of my life, so I'll have to see what's really, really speaking to me, because the TEDx goal was a really big goal that we had this year, because my dad is also a business coach, so he's been coaching me since I was a kid. So that was a really big goal we had this year, and it was one of those things that I didn't think was going to happen, but now it did happen, so I'm like, yay, it happened. But I was like, when he first told me, he was like, hey, I want you to do a TEDx talk, and I'm like, sure, yeah, like, I'm going to do a TEDx talk, like, that's definitely happening, right? And, you know, here we are. So now we get to go goal setting for what the next thing is.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're going to be basically going with your father into the next stages of everything.
Yeah.
He's pretty much been guiding you and helping you go and everything else.
Yeah.
But are you helping him with whatever he's doing? You said he hosts luncheons and so forth.
Yeah.
So you're a part of whatever that is? Is that like a non-profit or community service kind of like thing, or is it a business?
No, it's a business. So it's a business meeting, you know, just like any networking event, kind of a monthly event. So it's held currently at the Southern Rec Center on Belterre, the new tennis center. And it's every fourth Friday, except next month in October, it's going to be on the third Friday because of elections. But it's every fourth Friday when it's possible. And it's like, 90 minutes? It's 11:30, you come for networking, and then at 12 we have a few speakers. We usually invite some guest speakers, and, you know, it's only an hour, and then you have lunch, and then you can, you know, join the group or, keep coming back. First-time guests are free.
What's the mission statement for the group?
We're just looking to create a community of, he has a specific phrase, I think, hungry, helpful, and humble business owners who want to help each other, and we hold each other accountable, and I think there's about like 50 of us or something like that, 40 or something.
Okay. We'd like to thank Macy for joining us and sharing her story with us. It was a pleasure to talk to her and see somebody so young, so capable, and eloquent and articulate. I think in a time when a lot of people are very, we'll say, anxious to even talk to other people, she's talking to people that are older. She's talking in big groups and doing speeches. I think this is a good skill. I've encouraged my daughter to be involved in different things as well and talk to people. And she's very articulate as well. So I think that these things where we push our kids to get outside of their bubbles and away from maybe their phones and not being as social as they might have used to be in the past is a positive thing. And I hope that Macy has a good future, and also talking to people that, about this subject and helping them get there. Once again, I want to turn it over to Macy and see if she can go ahead and talk about the book that she's writing, and hopefully that people that are watching can get that book and get a little bit more information from her.
Yeah, so if you want to learn anything about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on the same socials, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. It's all pretty easy. Macy Baxi, B as in boy, A-X-I. Macy Baxi is technically how people pronounce it. So yeah, that's where you can follow me for all of the latest updates on what we're doing. And as of right now, I do have a website, fpc1234.com, and that takes you to all my podcasts and all that fun stuff.
Once again, I want to thank Macy for coming on, and I want to go ahead and say if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and we hope you'll join us for future videos. Thank you.